As the years rolled by, I found myself increasingly consumed by the aches and pains of aging. Each morning brought new complaints, my stiff knees, my sore back, my restless nights. At first, it felt cathartic to voice these grievances, but I never realized how toxic they were becoming, for both me and those around me. One evening, as we gathered for dinner, I launched into yet another monologue about my hip pain, detailing every twinge with dramatic flair. My grandson Thomas, usually so patient, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes darting toward the door. Before I could finish, he muttered something under his breath and bolted upstairs, slamming the bedroom door behind him. It wasn't until later that night, when no amount of knocking would coax him out, that I understood the gravity of what had happened. His mother explained through tears that Thomas was overwhelmed, not just by school or responsibilities, but by me. He felt suffocated by my constant negativity, which left him too drained to focus on his studies. That very week, he nearly missed an application deadline for a prestigious scholarship abroad because he couldn't concentrate. The guilt crushed me like a tidal wave. How had I let my own frustrations overshadow someone else's future? Worse still, this pattern repeated itself at every family gathering. When my husband criticized our daughter-in-law's cooking during one particularly tense meal, calling her dish inedible, she fled to her parents' house that same evening, leaving us all reeling. And then there were the stories, the endless retellings of my youth that made even my own children exchange weary glances. These words weren't harmless. They were weapons, chipping away at the fragile bonds holding us together. As the days turned into weeks, the house grew quieter, heavier with an unspoken tension that seemed to seep into every corner. My husband, once a vibrant man full of stories and laughter, had begun retreating into himself. At first, it was subtle, longer hours spent in his study, fewer words spoken at dinner, and eventually entire days where he wouldn't leave his room. I tried to brush it off as just another phase of aging, but our daughter Emily saw through the cracks. Her voice trembled one evening when she pulled me aside after yet another silent family meal. "Mom, I think Dad is slipping away," she whispered, her eyes glistening with worry. What if, what if he's depressed? What if something worse is going on? The thought sent a chill down my spine. Was this the same man who used to chase Thomas around the yard, laughing until his sides hurt? Now, even the sound of his footsteps had vanished from the halls. It wasn't long before things escalated. One night, a sharp thud jolted me awake. My heart raced as I stumbled out of bed, only to find my husband sprawled on the floor, pale and barely conscious. His breathing was shallow, his body cold to the touch. Panic surged through me like wildfire. "Call an ambulance," I screamed, shaking uncontrollably as Emily dialed 911. The paramedics arrived just in time, their calm voices cutting through the chaos as they worked to stabilize him. Later, at the hospital, the doctor's words echoed grimly. He ignored his symptoms for too long. High blood pressure, fatigue, it's all been building up. If you'd waited any longer. The sentence trailed off, but the implication hung heavy in the air. He could have died right there on our bedroom floor while I slept mere feet away. That realization crushed me. How had we let it come to this? Why hadn't I pushed harder, insisted he see a doctor sooner? Guilt became my constant companion in the weeks that followed. But that wasn't the end of our troubles. While my husband recovered slowly, another storm brewed within the household, one far more insidious than illness or isolation. It started innocently enough with my sister-in-law introducing me to a groundbreaking investment opportunity. She promised wealth beyond imagination, claiming it would secure our future and allow us to live out our golden years in luxury. Desperate to reclaim some semblance of control over our lives, I dove headfirst into the scheme, ignoring the nagging doubts in the back of my mind. Every dollar I invested felt like a step toward redemption, a way to erase the financial strain caused by medical bills and lost income during my husband's recovery. But greed, much like illness, has a way of creeping silently into your life until it consumes everything in its path. By the time I realized the truth that the company was nothing more than a pyramid scheme, it was too late. Our savings were gone, drained dry by promises of prosperity that never materialized. When the bank notices began arriving, panic set in. Our son, Michael, was the first to notice something was wrong. "Mom, why are there so many letters from creditors?" he asked one afternoon, his tone laced with concern. When I confessed the truth, shame burning hot in my cheeks, his face fell. "We're going to lose the house," he said flatly, his voice hollow with disbelief. To make matters worse, Michael and his wife decided to sell their own home, a modest place they'd worked tirelessly to buy, to cover the debts I'd accumulated. Watching them pack up their belongings, their toddler clinging to his mother's leg, broke something inside me. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about trust, responsibility, and the weight of knowing I jeopardized not only my future, but theirs as well. In the aftermath of these disasters, our family sat together in the dim light of the living room, the silence between us thick with unspoken regrets. We had faced death, betrayal, and financial ruin, all because of choices driven by fear, pride, or desperation. Yet, amidst the wreckage, a fragile hope began to emerge. Each of us vowed to do better, to communicate openly, to prioritize health, and to support one another without judgment. Life, we realized, isn't measured by the wealth we accumulate or the independence we cling to. It's defined by the love we share and the resilience we find in each other. The chaos of the world seemed to close in on us faster than we could have imagined. Just weeks after my husband's health scare and my own financial disaster, we found ourselves facing yet another series of harrowing events, each one a stark reminder of how fragile life had become in our later years. It all began innocently enough, with what was supposed to be a simple trip to the bustling market near our home. My husband insisted he felt strong enough to venture out, despite my protests that the crowded streets might overwhelm him. The moment we stepped into the noisy throng, I knew I'd been right. Vendors shouted over one another, carts rattled past at alarming speeds, and the air buzzed with an energy that felt suffocating rather than invigorating. Before I could grab his arm, a sudden surge of people pushed through, knocking my husband off balance. He fell hard onto the pavement, clutching his leg in agony. The sound of his cry pierced through the din like a knife. By the time the ambulance arrived, it was clear. His leg was broken, and recovery would take months. That day, as I sat by his hospital bed, guilt gnawed at me. How could I have let this happen? Why hadn't I insisted we stay home? But fate wasn't done testing us yet. A few weeks later, desperate to reclaim some semblance of normalcy, I decided to visit a temple perched high in the mountains, a place I'd always dreamed of seeing. Ignoring the warnings from family about the thin air and steep climb, I convinced myself that faith would carry me through. Halfway up the winding path, my lungs burned as if they were on fire. Each breath became a struggle, and before I knew it, darkness closed in around me. When I woke up, I was lying on the cold ground, surrounded by concerned hikers who had stopped to help. They told me I'd collapsed from altitude sickness and difficulty breathing. As I was carried down the mountain on a stretcher, shame washed over me. What had started as a spiritual journey had turned into a reckless gamble with my life. And then came the night that nearly shattered us completely. Still reeling from these incidents, we made the ill-fated decision to explore a new neighborhood during one of our evening walks. Lost in conversation, we failed to notice how far we'd wandered, or how unfamiliar the area had become. Shadows loomed larger as streetlights flickered weakly, casting eerie glows across graffiti-covered walls. Panic set in when we realized we couldn't find our way back. Every corner we turned seemed darker than the last, and the distant echoes of footsteps sent chills down my spine. Then, out of nowhere, two figures emerged from the gloom, their eyes gleaming with intent. "Hand over your belongings," one growled, stepping closer. Frozen with fear, we clutched our bags tightly, unsure of what to do next. Just as the situation reached its breaking point, a passing car slowed down, its headlights illuminating the scene. The would-be thieves fled into the shadows, leaving us trembling and disoriented. We stumbled home under the cover of darkness, hearts pounding, knowing we'd narrowly escaped something far worse. These experiences left indelible marks on us, not just physically, but emotionally. Each misstep reinforced the harsh reality that aging demands vigilance and wisdom. We couldn't afford to ignore the signs anymore. The noise, the altitude, the unfamiliar streets, all of them carried risks we hadn't fully understood until it was almost too late. And so as we pieced our lives back together, we vowed to make better choices. No more venturing into chaotic markets or scaling treacherous heights. No more wandering into unknown territories without preparation. Our golden years weren't meant to be spent fighting for survival. They were meant to be cherished, lived with purpose and care. Slowly, painfully, we learned that safety isn't just a luxury, it's a necessity. The storm that had been brewing within our family finally broke one fateful evening, shattering the fragile peace we'd clung to for so long. It began innocently enough, a family dinner meant to bring us together after weeks of simmering tension. But beneath the surface, resentment and misunderstanding were building like a pressure cooker about to explode. My husband's constant complaints about his health, my reckless spending habits, and the endless repetition of stories no one wanted to hear anymore had worn everyone down. That night, it all came crashing down. It started with an argument over something trivial, my insistence on visiting a crowded market despite everyone's warnings. "Why won't you listen?" Emily snapped, her voice trembling with the frustration. "You almost got Dad killed last month at the market. Do you even care what happens to us?" Her words cut through the room like a knife, leaving silence in their wake. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but before I could speak, Michael chimed in, his tone icy, and, "We're tired, Mom. Tired of cleaning up your messes. Tired of watching you risk everything because you refuse to see how your actions affect us." The accusation hit me like a punch to the gut. Before I could respond, Thomas stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I can't do this anymore," he muttered under his breath, grabbing his jacket and heading for the door. "Wait!" I called after him, panic rising in my chest. He didn't stop. The slam of the front door echoed through the house, followed by a deafening silence. For a moment, none of us moved. Then Emily buried her face in her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. "This is breaking us apart," she whispered, her voice breaking. "If things don't change, I don't know if we'll survive as a family." Just as the emotional turmoil reached its peak, another crisis struck, this time far more dire. In the early hours of the next morning, my husband collapsed in the hallway, clutching his chest. His breathing was shallow, his face pale as death. Panic surged through me as I dialed 911, my hands shaking so badly I could barely press the numbers. By the time the ambulance arrived, I was sobbing uncontrollably, guilt and fear choking me. At the hospital, the diagnosis was grim, a mild heart attack brought on by stress and neglecting his health. The doctor's warning rang in my ears. Next time, it might be worse. But the chain of disasters didn't end there. While grappling with the aftermath of the medical emergency, we received devastating news. The bank was threatening foreclosure on our home due to the mounting debts from my pyramid scheme fiasco. Michael and his wife sat us down one evening, their faces etched with exhaustion and despair. "We've decided to sell our house," Michael said flatly, avoiding eye contact. "It's the only way to cover the debt." Tears welled up in my eyes as I realized the magnitude of what I'd done. Their sacrifice wasn't just financial, it was a blow to their dreams, their security, their future. As if these challenges weren't enough, a near fatal incident occurred during one of our ill-advised outings. Determined to prove I was still capable, I insisted on climbing a steep mountain trail to visit a temple. Halfway up, my lungs burned and darkness closed in around me. I collapsed, unconscious, with no one nearby to help. When I woke up in the hospital, surrounded by worried faces, I learned I'd been lucky. A passing hiker had found me just in time. The realization that I could have died alone on that mountain left me shaken to my core. Each catastrophe pushed our family closer to the brink. Thomas, who once adored spending time with us, now avoided coming home altogether. Even Emily, who had always been the peacemaker, seemed distant, her patience worn thin. The weight of our mistakes hung heavy in the air, a constant reminder of how close we'd come to losing everything, not just our home or health, but each other. Yet amidst the wreckage, a glimmer of hope emerged. As we gathered around my husband's hospital bed, holding hands and sharing quiet apologies, I saw something I hadn't noticed before: resilience. We were broken, but not beyond repair. Each of us vowed to make changes, not just for ourselves, but for the family we loved. Slowly, painfully, we began to rebuild, learning to communicate, to forgive, and to prioritize what truly mattered. Life, we realized, wasn't about perfection, it was about connection. The turning point came on a rainy afternoon, the kind where the sky seemed to mirror the turmoil in our hearts. We had reached the edge of despair, our family fractured, our finances in shambles, and our health hanging by a thread. But it was during this darkest hour that something remarkable happened. We finally stopped running from each other and faced the truth. Sitting together in the dimly lit living room, tears streaming down our faces, we began to speak, not with anger or blame, but with raw honesty. Emily broke the silence first, her voice trembling, yet resolute. "I don't want to lose this family," she admitted, clutching her hands tightly. "But if we keep going like this, I'm afraid we will." Her words struck a chord deep within me, forcing me to confront the reality of my own actions. The constant complaining about my health, the reckless spending, the stubborn refusal to listen. I saw how these choices had not only hurt me, but also weighed heavily on those I loved most. Michael nodded slowly, his eyes red-rimmed. We need to do better for all of us. As the storm outside raged on, we made a pact, a promise to rebuild what we had nearly destroyed. My husband, still recovering from his heart attack, vowed to take control of his health, starting with small steps like daily walks and healthier meals. I promised to let go of the past, the endless stories, the criticisms, the negativity, and focus instead on being present for my grandchildren and children. For the first time in years, I realized that life wasn't about reliving old glories or dwelling on pain. It was about creating new memories, fostering love, and finding joy in the little things. The changes weren't easy, nor were they immediate. There were days when old habits threatened to creep back in, when frustration bubbled over, and when doubts lingered. But every time we faltered, we reminded ourselves of the alternative, the broken family we had almost become. Thomas returned home one evening, hesitant at first, but warmed by the sight of his grandfather teaching him chess. Emily organized weekly dinners, insisting that no matter how busy life got, we would always carve out time for each other. Slowly but surely, the walls between us crumbled, replaced by laughter, shared meals, and quiet moments of understanding. One evening, as we gathered around the table, I noticed something extraordinary. Gone were the tense silences and biting remarks. Instead, there was warmth, real, palpable warmth. My husband smiled as he recounted a funny story from his morning walk, and even Thomas chimed in, sharing a tale from school. It was then I understood. Happiness isn't found in perfection, it's found in connection. By choosing to change, to truly listen, to support, and to forgive, we had transformed not just our lives, but the very essence of who we were as a family. Looking back now, I see those trials as blessings in disguise. They forced us to grow, to adapt, and to rediscover what truly matters. Our golden years, once clouded by fear and regret, became filled with purpose and love. Every sunrise felt like a gift, every hug a reminder of how far we'd come. And though aging still brought its challenges, we faced them together with resilience, grace, and an unshakable bond.